Hey there, Mike Robbins here, coming to you live. I want to talk a bit about the truth. Telling the truth is what this video is going to be all about. Now, I'm going to do something I think I've done once before, which is I'm going to record my podcast simultaneously while I'm doing this live video. So if you're joining live on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, feel free to chime in and leave some comments. And you can ask some questions there, but I'm going to hit record on my podcast in just a second. So I'm going to do this simultaneously. We'll see how it goes, but hopefully it all works out. Thanks for joining. Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I hope you're doing well. I'm actually recording this on, what's today? Tuesday, the 2nd of March around 10:35 a.m. Pacific time, and I'm simultaneously doing a live video on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So we'll see how this goes. But today, I want to talk a little bit about the truth, telling the truth, and the importance of telling the truth. I mean, we all know it's important to tell the truth, right? I mean, your mom taught you that, your dad taught you that, your teachers, coaches, ministers. Tell the truth, right? Don't lie. But it seems to me, I don't know, it feels like there's a lot of people struggling right now. I know that we've been struggling at my house for sure over the last days, weeks, months. You know, we're coming up almost on a year, at least here in the US, when the pandemic really hit. You know, today's what, March 2nd. And it was really March 11th last year that everything kind of became clear how serious. And then over the next few days, the 13th, the 15th, schools and businesses and everything kind of shut down. This week last year, I was on the road. I had an event in Indianapolis on the 3rd and then one in San Diego on the 5th of March. And those are the last two in-person speaking engagements I did. The last two times I was on an airplane. But it seems like just about everyone I know, when I talk to them about their work life, about their home life, particularly parents of teenagers like us, people are really struggling in different ways and with different aspects of life, of work, of relationships, of family, of health, and look, that's always the case, but there seems to be something extra intense right now. And as we are, even though it's, you know, vaccines are rolling out and we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. And one of the things that I notice, and I've noticed this throughout the course of my life, and this is a big part of the work that I do with teams and with leaders. And, you know, when we talk about authenticity, is that when we tell the truth about what's really going on, two things happen. One is it liberates us to a certain degree, because holding on to, right? What did Carl Jung famously say? We're only as sick as our secrets. So holding on to secrets and hiding things can literally make us sick, mentally, emotionally, even physically. So by telling the truth about what's happening, what's going on, particularly when things are challenging, it liberates us. The other thing that it does is it gives other people permission to do the same. And in doing that, then we can start to have a more real conversation. We can start to connect more authentically. We might even be able to support each other or create a more supportive environment around us. So there's a story that I share in my book, Nothing Changes Until You Do, from a number of years ago. Michelle and I, the girls were quite young at the time. We have two daughters, you know, Samantha's 15 now and Rosie's 12. And we surprisingly got pregnant for a third time, which we weren't planning on. And I can't remember exactly. The girls were young. I mean, Rosie was probably 2, maybe a year and a half. And so Samantha would have been around 4. And so, you know, we were knee deep in babies, toddlers, like struggling, sort of coming out just barely on the other side. Or maybe it was right in the middle of kind of the struggle with the recession. So things were challenging for us financially. And the thought of having a third baby was like, oh my gosh. I mean, it was exciting, but it was scary. And within a very short amount of time from finding out that Michelle was pregnant, we had a miscarriage. She had a miscarriage, and we lost the baby. And it happened all really, really fast. We had told a couple of people, not a ton of people, but we told a number of people in our inner circle because we'd had two babies and hadn't experienced that. And so then we had to go and have, we went through the whole shock and grief, and we both had different emotions about it. And it was hard, and it was scary, and it was weird, and just like confusing, because I was feeling sadness, but some relief, and then some guilt for feeling relieved. And Michelle was having a very different experience, obviously, physically than I was, as well as mentally and emotionally. So we were struggling with that and not wanting to share it with the girls because they were so young. But what I found as I was then forced to talk to people about it, because we had told people, oh my gosh, we're pregnant, we're going to have a third baby. And then we had to tell them, actually, we're not. It was painful and sensitive and vulnerable and emotional to talk about. But so many people were like, oh yeah, we had a miscarriage, or we had 2 miscarriages, or 3 miscarriages. And we just started hearing all these miscarriage stories, which on the one hand, it was really helpful in some ways to hear, and we were able to get some good advice and empathy and support around it. But I was like, oh my gosh, like nobody really talks about this. I mean, I guess they do, but and there was something about it that I both appreciated, but I found sad at the same time. Like that a lot of people were struggling or suffering in silence about this, or it was just this taboo topic, like a number of taboo topics in our culture that we don't necessarily talk about. We don't know. It's not like a normal, cocktail party, dinner party, at the office conversation. Like, hey, how many miscarriages have you had? Again, telling the truth isn't about broadcasting to the whole world our deep, dark secrets, our personal challenges and struggles necessarily, but it is about being real about our experience and what's going on. And so right now, I think being able to really tell the truth about what we're experiencing, how we're doing, how our families are doing, again, with a certain amount of confidentiality, I'm mindful of the fact that it's not my place to share about Michelle's struggles or Samantha or Rosie's struggles. Like those are their stories and their life to share, but I can share about my own, and not just struggles per se, but like life, what's happening. What's interesting, one of the hardest and most vulnerable things for people to share these days, and I hear this from a lot of people, I was actually talking to a group just yesterday about this, is people are actually doing well right now, or feeling good, or enjoying life, or things are going well in someone's life personally, or for a team or a group or an organization. And it's like, or I had a leader a number of months ago say, well, the pandemic's been bad for the world, but great for our business. And I have sort of weird mixed feelings about it. But that's also true, I think, in personal lives. It's like, if your kids are doing really well right now, academically, emotionally, socially, but you hear all these stories of kids who aren't, that can be as vulnerable as sharing, my kid is really struggling, or we're really struggling as a family. The majority of people that I know, when they tell the truth these days, are definitely struggling in different aspects of life and of business and family, relationship, health, whatever the case may be. But again, the more willing we are to tell the truth, the more freedom we have to really share our experience, the more it can liberate us, the more it doesn't have to be this burden that we're carrying. And again, that doesn't mean we have to come on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or LinkedIn or on our podcast, if we have one, or whatever, and share everything that's going on with us. But do we have friends and family members or coworkers, or enough of an inner circle that we can really share our real experience? I'm so grateful for my men's group. I've talked about my men's group here on the podcast before. But I've been part of a couple different men's groups over the last maybe 13 years, 14 years. And it's one place, not the only place, but one place that I can go. And now, we meet on Zoom, unfortunately, but that's just the reality of we were doing a little social distance meeting in my backyard in the summer, but then once it got cold and the sun was going down earlier, we stopped doing that, and maybe we'll pick that up again before we can get back to meeting in person again. But just being on Zoom with my men's group is an opportunity, even if it's just for an hour every 2 weeks, to just take off the mask and lower the waterline on the iceberg, as I say, and just get real about what it's really like to be me, to be a man, to be a husband, to be a father, to be a human being, to be a business owner, to do, again, not feeling sorry for myself, but just telling the truth and listening to other, in this case, men, because it's a men's group, share their truth, right? The saying from the Bible, the truth shall set you free. And there's real truth to that. Although I think it was Gloria Steinem whose take on it is the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. Sometimes hearing the truth from others can be difficult, can be painful, but ultimately when you think about our relationships. So Michelle and I just started watching this show on Apple TV. Maybe you've seen it. It's been out for a while. I'd heard about it, but we just have been watching a few episodes. Ted Lasso. It's a really funny show. Jason Sudeikis, I think is the guy's name, who is the star of it, and he plays an American football coach from Wichita State, who's just sort of salt of the earth, speaks with a twang, super positive guy, gets hired to coach this football, like soccer team over in England, and he comes over and we're only like 4 or 5 episodes in, so I think the first season has 10, so I don't know how it all plays out, but the episode that we just watched last night, he was talking about some issues he and his wife were having in their marriage, and that they worked with a therapist and they came up with a code word, and their code word happened to be Oklahoma, which he had a whole funny backstory to that, of when one of them says that word to the other. Oklahoma means the other person has to tell the truth about what they're really thinking and how they're really feeling in the moment. And it plays out in some funny ways during the episode and during the show. But I just thought, what a great, first of all, on the one hand, wouldn't it be great if we didn't even have to have a code word? We didn't have to say Oklahoma to someone to get them to really tell the truth about how they're actually feeling or what they're thinking in the moment. But how great, whether it's in our relationships, our marriage, our family, our friends, at work, with our coworkers, how liberating is it when we can just tell the truth, when we can just speak what's true and real for us. Now, again, that doesn't mean attacking and blaming and judging and criticizing the other person and other people, but speaking from our own experience. So the best way for us to tell the truth is to use I statements. I think, I feel, I notice, I want. It can even be that I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm needing some space, or I don't want to talk to you right now. But again, as opposed to you, right? One of the things, and you've probably heard me talk about this here on the podcast, or if you're watching this on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, you've probably heard me talk about the authenticity equation, right? Honesty minus self-righteousness plus vulnerability. So we can be honest. We can be self-righteously honest, like honest that I think you're a jerk and I think, but do it in a you are, you should, you shouldn't, and those are all judgments that ultimately have the other person get defensive. So can we remove the righteousness and just speak our real truth, which is adding that vulnerability to, here's how I'm feeling, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm experiencing. And in doing that, it allows us to, again, liberate ourselves, give other people permission to do the same, and connect more genuinely. Again, with what's happening right now for a lot of us as we grapple with and still make our way, we're coming out of a very long winter. It's still winter, I guess, technically for another, almost 3 weeks, but spring is coming, both the actual spring season, but it feels like, again, I don't want to get too far ahead, and we're getting warnings from the CDC director and others to let's not, open up too quickly, meaning like the leaders in different states and places. And as citizens of the US or other countries, let's not just jump back into our activities just because people are getting vaccinated. And ultimately, it seems as though things are getting better with the pandemic. And as I'm recording this, as I'm sharing this, those of you listening to the podcast, I'm also on on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube, and people are watching this live. And there's a comment that came in from Casey Anderson that I appreciate, right? Speaking the truth can certainly lift a burden, but not at the expense of someone else's feelings. And that's the interesting challenge, right, Casey, is again, and when we speak from our own experience, when we use I statements, when we let people know, I think, I feel, I want, I notice, yes, it's possible, depending on what we're sharing and who we're sharing it with, they might have a reaction to it. They may not like hearing what we have to say. So doing it in a way where we're not attacking or blaming or judging or criticizing another human being. But the truth is, sometimes how I feel is not how you feel, and how I feel and what I want and what I think is different than what you feel and what you think and what you want. And you might be upset or disappointed. It might hurt your feelings. Right? And we got to be able to be okay with that. Just even, again, in the pandemic, I've said this before, right? We're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. I had a episode not that long ago where that was the specific theme of it. But at your house and on your team and in your world, even with the people that you work closely with or live closely with, like at our house, there are times that we all have different needs, whether it's what show to watch or what people want to do, or like, I really, really want to connect with Michelle and she really needs some downtime, alone time. How do we navigate that? Well, we got to speak the truth. Because if she says, yes, let's hang out, or let's sit on the couch and watch this show, or let's do this thing, but she doesn't really mean it, then she's ultimately going to be resentful, or vice versa. And yes, sometimes we have to make some concessions and some compromises for the people that we live with and the people that we work with so that we can make it work as best as possible for everybody. But ultimately, don't we want to create an environment in our relationships, in our families, on our teams, where people can really tell the truth and say what they think and how they feel, even if those thoughts and feelings and opinions are in conflict with one another? So yeah, we don't want to just run around spouting off, I'm just speaking my truth, just deal with it, which is often code for, I get to be rude and offensive and you just have to deal with it and don't be too sensitive. That's one extreme. The other extreme is where we walk on eggshells around each other. People don't really speak up. People don't really express what they're thinking and feeling and what they need. And then that's unhealthy for a whole different reason. So telling the truth, speaking the truth, can not only set us free and liberate us, it gives other people permission to do the same. And then ultimately, here's what we find. Here's what I find. Oftentimes we think that our burdens, our challenges are so personal, they're so unique, they're so specific to us. And on the one hand, they are. They are, right? My specific challenges in life, my specific vulnerabilities, my specific fears and doubts and insecurities are unique to me. I'm experiencing them personally in the moment. However, when I share them with you authentically, vulnerably, courageously, again, it liberates me, gives you permission to do the same thing. But what it also does is invites us into a conversation where you might actually have some support, some wisdom, some insight, some perspective that can help me. Have you ever noticed that other people's burdens and challenges and issues are a lot easier to deal with than our own? Right? Because we're not emotionally attached to them. When someone comes and shares with me, oh, I had this big financial challenge, or I have this parenting challenge, or I have this health challenge, or I have this fear or this doubt or this insecurity. Usually it's like, oh, I have some advice on that. I have some wisdom. Best thing to do, by the way, first and foremost, is really listen and acknowledge them, thank them for sharing with you authentically. But it's amazing what can happen because, again, outside of myself, outside of our own emotional attachment, there's more perspective. Some of the challenges I've been facing recently as a parent, without throwing either of our girls under the bus, reaching out to a handful of people who I really respect, I really trust, I know I can share in confidence, and that they'll have some wisdom and experience to share back with me because they've raised kids. Maybe specifically daughters, maybe specifically a few years older than mine, so they've been down the path before. We need that. Last week I was talking on the podcast and here on social media about the importance of asking for help, and that the answer is always no if we don't ask. So part of telling the truth and lowering the waterline on the iceberg is letting people know, I'm struggling, I could use some help. Can you support me? And most often, even with as challenged as many people are these days, the empathy deficit that I think a lot of us are experiencing, most of us are more than willing, more than happy to help and support the people around us. We are all in this together, ultimately, even though we're in the same storm in different boats. So thanks so much for listening to the podcast. If that's what you're doing right in this moment, and if you're watching on social media, thanks for doing that. If you are listening to the podcast, or even if you're watching on social media, there's some links in the show notes of the podcast where you can connect with me. If we're connected on social media, I'll put a link to our website in the comments, but you can stay connected with me at mike-robbins.com. And for the podcast, I will be doing some interviews in subsequent weeks, as well as some solo episodes. And here on social media, I may be doing these things combined, where I do the podcast and the social media live at the same time. And I might even be interviewing some folks. So thanks so much for listening. Until next time, keep telling the truth, keep bringing your whole self to work and to life. And remember, we definitely are all in this together. All right. Thanks so much for joining. Not sure how much I love the sort of multitasking of the podcast and the social live, but I may do that again a few times. But I definitely enjoy connecting with you this way on social media, and look forward. I'll be on live probably again next week. Take care.